Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Piercy. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Alliance for Peacebuilding, and I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for coming along and taking part in Day 2 of PeaceCon 2024, Status Quo No More. I really also want to thank you all for the passion and the commitment that we have seen in so many of the sessions. It's one thing to sit passively in some of our plenaries and receive, but we've seen so many fantastic questions, so much thoughtful, challenging discourse, and I think that really is a reflection of the quality of obviously of AFP's member institutions, and so we really appreciate it. Another thank you for all of our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we could not make any of this happen, and so we're truly so appreciative and grateful. I'll be your MC for the afternoon, and I intend to not speak very much at all, but I will just say that obviously AFP really values leadership. For us, it's about walking the talk of being peace builders and being conflict prevention minded. And to that end, our very first session in this afternoon's proceedings is a discussion on leadership with the author of a recently released and just hit, I understand, #1 in the new releases on Amazon book. Congratulations, Hamse Warfe. And Hamse will join us for a conversation with our own Vice Board Chair, Rebeccra Crall, who is the Peacebuilding and Conflict Prevention Manager for Rotary International. So welcome, Rebeccra and Hamse.
I just have to say thank you to the AFP, to Liz and the staff. Seriously, this has been such a thoughtful conference so far, and I'm just going to echo what Michelle was saying in terms of the questions and what we're talking about. These are not easy times, and I'm hoping everyone is feeling a little bit more hopeful about what we can all do. So in that vein, I am really excited to be here with Hamse Warfe and to talk about leadership. So I run Rotary International's portfolio in peacebuilding and conflict prevention, and we do a lot of things, but in many ways we're in the business of building leaders through many of our scholarship and fellowship programs, but really also at the community level through our members all around the globe. And I certainly have been asking myself in the last year, 5 years, 10 years, what does leadership actually mean in a time like this? So Hamse is here to hopefully shed some light for all of us. We're gonna, be on stage speaking, but we're also really hoping to get questions. So we're not just gonna be talking at you. We're gonna try to provide some decent amount of time. So please be thinking about, what leadership means to you and what questions you might have. But Hamse, thank you for being here with us, and really congratulations again on that book. I mean, that is such an incredible and exciting thing, and a sign that people are really thirsty for this type of information. So you have an incredible story. I will do it injustice by trying to explain it, but born in Somalia, came to the United States as a young child. You've worked in so many different positions in local government, civil society. You were appointed in 2022 by President Biden to serve as a senior advisor in the State Department, and you've just left that post, and you've come out with this incredible book, The Transformational Leader. So that really just is my first question for you, which is, what motivated you to write this book? And you must have been omniscient because we could not need it more than now. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I first really want to thank the Alliance for Peacebuilding and our conference organizers, our host here at the George Mason University. My story with Peacebuilding started with Alliance for Peacebuilding. I think it was 2009 maybe, or 2008. I was hosting a conference in San Diego, California, where I lived at the time. And I was looking for speakers. So I just went into Google and, I was like, Peacebuilding speakers. And at that time, I was spelling peace building, peace, and then building, and you know how the journey we went even with our own terminologies in this sector. And Chick Denbach, who was the president of Alliance for Peacebuilding at the time, I know he's not here, but I always commented how he did not respond my first call, but he did my second call. And as a young person who got a call from a president of such a global, association, it meant the world to me. We invited Chick to San Diego, and so I've always been fascinated and deeply interested as someone who believes, leadership is not a process that ends somewhere. It's it's a journey. It's a journey that never ends. It's a learning. So I want to start off with a caveat that I don't believe someone is a leadership expert. I believe all of us are leadership practitioners, and we all bring a set of experiences that we can mutually benefit from each other. And so the premise of my writing on this book, my second book, my first book was published in 2014 when I was 4 years old. Really, first book was more memoir of my journey to the U.S., the stories of and the contributions of immigrants to the United States, and the role of young people, not just as subjects of conversations, but participants of our conversations and our discourse. But since 2014, now that I read my first book, I'm like, what was I thinking, right? I've just, the fundamental role that leadership plays in our lives, something we take for granted in talking about it. And the reflection I make personally is I think about my own life, growing up in Mogadishu, being born in Somalia, with parents who were very successful business entrepreneurs. My father had a livestock business. My mother had a fashion store, clothing store. And some of you know that Somalia had the first democratic government in 1960, but it was short-lived. Within 9 years, we had a military coup. And so the reflections that, as I was thinking about writing a book, was, the role leadership played in the destruction of my country of origin, and how even business success does not guarantee, peaceful functioning society. And so every time I look at those issues, it really comes back to leadership. Leadership as a fundamental, foundational element on everything that we want to accomplish in life, rooted in integrity, rooted in accountability. When you look at young people, emerging leaders, what they're most frustrated with is lack of leadership, whether you talk about in government, civil society, or private sector. And so what I try to do is, I did not create these 12 practices. These are universal values. It's a values-based, narrative-based leadership book. But I've combined them in a way that I think these 12 are complementary and need each other for the time we're in now. So integrity, accountability, purpose, humility, and both at the local level, but also as we connect to the global, So sorry, taking a little longer, but just wanted to give you a little bit of context of why I decided to write the book.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think one of the things that I love so much about the approach is that we are looking at the whole context. It's a very holistic approach, so we're not just looking at, our national leaders, but we're really looking at ourselves, how we're accountable to ourselves, our community, the organizations in which we work. And, throughout the day, there's these threads we've been talking about. Trust, social trust in institutions, government, business, identity, a vision for what a future might look like. So the fact is that leadership now has to contend with these circumstances in very polarized communities, very polarized nations. So how can, and I know you've talked about this, democracy is a huge thread throughout the book, through your work in the Horn of Africa, now in the United States. So what are your thoughts and what are the most important things that everyone in this room can actually be thinking about when we are working in these communities, these polarized communities, and also working with people that might not even have this in their mind, right? Because we all do, but so many people do not. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure, Rebecca. Yeah, my experience with the Biden administration over the last 2 years, previously I've worked at the state level in local and civil society, is that really global is local and local is global. And I think more so now, the importance of local leadership in advancing, strengthening our democracy. I don't think we can really strengthen, sustain, protect our democracy without local leadership. And when I say local leadership, it starts with the individual. What I have seen is, through the presidential initiative on democratic renewal, I had a unique opportunity of meeting and connecting with over 48 states in the United States, as part of the Summit for Democracy that I'm sure some of you have participated. And, the democracy just becomes this thing where everybody talks about, and it's kind of the elite Washington, we don't even understand what it stands for. That's kind of the sentiments that you hear sometimes. And so connecting democracy and democracy themes into the daily lives of people at the local level requires the local leadership to prioritize that. And I don't think without that, we're going to be able to protect our democracy fully. You talk about young people, see my former colleague Amy here, who did really outstanding work in youth leadership and peace building globally. And just everywhere you look at, people are really, really hungry for local leadership that understands the role of the self, role of the community, role of organizations, and role of government. And so how can we connect those dots in a way that meets the current challenge that we're experiencing? And so this conversation is taking place, and it's taking place in so many levels, but there's also disconnect. And so I cannot really emphasize enough, how much the local leadership matters to the work that we're doing in the global or national leadership. And more so in the next, 2 months, as we have important election coming up, regardless of where people stand, it's just on issues, but in candidates, but just like what are the elements that are going to make us, thrive in functioning society, and keeping that as a fundamental question, as we move into the election.
Yeah, and that immediately brings to mind, in one of the last sessions, the concurrent sessions, we were talking about withdrawal. And I think that when you're in situations of high levels of fear, high levels of anxiety, and certainly high levels of conflict, there's a desire to withdraw from the situation. But as leaders in our country, or our communities in our countries, we actually have to have the resilience and be brave enough to actually stand up and represent something that's different. And I think that can be incredibly difficult. And one of the parts of your story that moved me the most was regarding probably one of the toughest conflicts we have in the world right now, which is the Israeli-Palestinian question and the attacks of October 7th. And I know that the reactions that many of us had, including yourself, were so conflicted. I think about an anecdotal story of a Palestinian man living in the West Bank who before that day had traveled, albeit it would take him 5 to 8 hours to get from his home in the West Bank to Israel to work every day. And after the attacks, he was unable to do that. So he lost his livelihood. He lost his ability to see his good friends and Israelis that had helped and cared for him. But he also lost his ability to speak about those conflicted feelings that he had. So he actually wasn't able to dive into this complex narrative that he had about that. And I think that as leaders, you actually have to embrace and understand these complex narratives, even in conflict as difficult and protracted as the one between Israel and Palestine. So when we look at, we have a lot of things we're having to deal with as leaders at the local level and the national level. But if you have communities that are polarized, but now in communities that are experiencing protracted conflict, how do we dig in, like within ourselves, to be able to lead in those very difficult circumstances?
Yeah, personally, this is, I'm sure all of us are, painfully touched by the current, catastrophe and conflict happening in the Middle East. For me, especially since I left the Biden administration recently, and my previous work, bringing communities together in Minnesota, where I currently live, has been really challenging because bringing communities affected by the violence and the conflict, and how that's also impacting everything at our local communities. I experienced 3 generations of war. My grandfather was displaced by war in the Ethiopia-Somalia 1960s war. And then my father was displaced by the same conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia, 1977. And then I was born in Somalia myself. And then I was displaced by the civil war in Somalia. So I'm someone who's familiar with, displacement, the painful experiences of relocating so many times, being in the middle of, civilians being in the middle of conflict. So the humanitarian and human rights part of it, I think it's one that we all recognize and we're all feeling the pain. But from a leadership perspective, the power of the narrative is important here. The second point that I want to emphasize is, if you look at the current leaders of this conflict, they have embedded narrative that they have of the past that are really barrier to us getting to solutions. And so how do we move from being in this state of forever war and conflict into one where we can genuinely address without the past narrative creating barriers, and so I wish maybe this is a question. Maybe I'm hoping that audience I can turn and be a MC myself. What do you guys think of that? Anyone has solution for this conflict? Legacy conflict. So.
Yeah, I know that is actually a very tough question. And I know that we are running up the clock to 3:30, but since we did start late, I think I was given permission to go a little bit longer, so I can ask one more question of you, and then we would love to open it up to the audience. So I have more than one question, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do the intergenerational question, because I'm a mother, I have 2 kids, and I constantly feel like we are failing this young generation. Oftentimes, it is not our own individual fault, but as a society, I feel like we are not giving them every opportunity to understand what it means to be human and understand what it means to have empathy for other humans. So what are your thoughts on, again, it can be from that personal level, but coming to the community and the society, how can we build a stronger intergenerational leadership model where we are leading our youth in a more positive way, and then we're also able to listen without automatically judging what our youth are telling us, so we're growing together?
Yeah, this speaks to my, I think it's the 10th of the 12 practices, which is humility. Humility for, established leaders to have some level of trust and let young people experiment new ideas of what they hope, what they want to see for their future. And creating the space necessary for mentorship, for guidance, but really getting out of the way for young people to lead us. And I think at least, in my experience, both at the state governments and under government team malls, and under federal government, under Biden administration, I don't believe we have the infrastructure necessary to generate intergenerational guidance and support for young people. And I also don't think, a lot of established leaders are not letting go. And I think that's a big problem, especially if I can be blunt, those who are coming from diverse communities feel the space isn't there for them to lead and exercise and show their leadership skills in, globalized, communities that we're living in now. So that continues to be a major barrier. I wish philanthropy, I'm always calling out philanthropy because that's the sector I spent longest in my career before government. Until we aligned resources and supports and creating the space necessary for young people and established leaders for young people to also realize, there is a space for living in the real world and at the same time living in the ideal world. And so creating that alignment or the balance and act needed from living in the real world and living in an ideal world. Because I have nieces, my niece saw me getting a Starbucks coffee the other day, and she was like, "Oh my God, we've been banning Starbucks, and here you're having your own," Yeah, true, absolutely. But at the same time, we need, it's much more complex. It's much more complex, and so I think, having that space of dialogue even to recognize that, yes, it's true, but also there is a need for, I was called out the other day at a conference when someone said, "Well, you are a Biden guy," and and I said, I admire your courage, I admire you speaking up. I'm all for solutions, and we need to get to solutions. I think the more we can move beyond admiring the problems and get to identifying the solutions that we need, the closer we are to have a truly functioning society.
That is a great way to end. I think really focusing on solutions, as hard as they may seem, is what we absolutely have to do. Yeah, and broadening it out, right? Everyone in this room has little things that they can do, but also broadening it out to the wider public as much as possible. All right, I think we have I think someone's lined up for a question. I think we have some minutes. We can take questions. If you have other questions, please feel free, line up at the microphones. Oh, and never mind, we're gonna hand them around.
All right, I'll ask a really quick question. Hamse, there's 12 steps. Of those 12, what's the key?
Oh, wow. I think we have 56 days left from the election. I'm going to say democracy. Now, if you ask me after the election, which one, we'll talk about it, because I think accountability for me stands out. I think the accountability, I also think that, just because someone went to Yale or Harvard doesn't mean that, all of these essential leadership skills for humanity are practicing values. And so I think one of the reasons why I emphasized, integrity, purpose, accountability as the first, three for someone to lead themselves. Before you can even lead your community, before you can lead your family, before you, having these three and how you can maximize practicing those three, is because without those three, the negative consequences of leadership is profound. I have a first-hand personal experience of that under our, under my, country of origin, under the leaders, that we have in various, places in here as well as, where I came from. And so I think those three, and then leading the team, someone who, a leader who does not prioritize, inclusion, empathy, and dignity for their teams. it's not going to be successful. And then the other three being, prosperity, like coming from a strength-based. So, I mean, you asked me one and I went over all of them, but I think I would say democracy. I buy the book. Thank you. I'm not good at marketing. I probably should have said that at the beginning. But, I think I would say democracy for next 56 days, and then let's have another conference and I can show up and talk about which one is next. Thank you, Liz.
That's related actually to the question that I had, because democracy and peace building are both necessarily community projects, and you need the community buy-in and everybody, maybe not everybody, but many people in the community to participate. And we've had, and I think even more so now with social media and personal branding, you identify Gandhi, you identify a political leader, and there's this kind of like, this one person is going to save democracy. This one person is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and they are the ones that do peace building. But you need everybody to participate in it. And so how do you thread that needle? How do you engage in a community building project with leadership, or how do you, I don't know if it's sharing leadership, diversifying leadership?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. It's really, so this is where I'll do the marketing on the book. In the book, I really try to emphasize that, what we need, the leadership we need for this moment is one that's collective, collaborative-based approach, and not, one hero, person who thinks he or she is, the only person that can solve our complex problems. As I said, under our previous, my original country, we had one leader like that who believed everything should go through him. He took us to wars. He took us to, internal conflicts, and because he was the hero, he was the leader. And so we cannot afford, the United States cannot afford to have a leader like that, because the severe consequences are not only for the US, it's global. And so I think the only way we can practice, democracy is about practicing power together and not alone. And to do that, we need a collaborative, collective approach to, and really bring in democracy, as I said, not this thing that's, Washington, D.C., Beltway, group power, but something that is practiced at the local level, and not, this elite thing. And I think that's what I have personally experienced, is spending with young people time, talking about democracy. And hence why a lot of young people say, you know what, we prefer someone just making decisions for us. This thing is messy called democracy, without understanding, it's a privileged position to say that. And so I think the more we normalize and make democracy as something that is everyday thing that we're practicing together as a collective, collaborative approach, that's what we really need for this moment, from my perspective. And I think that's what we need, all of us, to emphasize more.
I think we have time for one more quick question, and then we'll have to wrap it. Sorry.
We're so sweet. You can always tell me, and I'll add it to yours. I'm Nasra Ismail. I'm a fan. I met you when I was serving abroad in Kenya. So Hamse, thank you for writing not just this book, but your other book as well. Sorry, it was Peacebuilding Conference, but we're going to talk about the debate a little bit. So I learned a little bit about the debate and just how powerful a negative story is, even if it's not true. And I wonder, because of what you just said, like a lot of us who have multiple identities, we know exactly how to defeat a particular type of single man powerful hero, but a negative leader who's not interested in democracy. And I wish I can tell like all of my American friends, like this is the formula to beat them. We've lived through them. Our country is destroyed for 30 years. So it's like, rather than fear us, we literally have the antidote, like we can help you. So I wonder, what's the positive experience of the trauma that you went through? And if you could tell everybody who's not been displaced about how to recognize that kind of a leader, but then build a coalition of leadership, what would it be? How could you turn your trauma, which we feel so sorry for, into really our collective safety?
Thank you, Nasra. Yeah, my favorite book is Man's Search for Meaning. And the main reason is that, turning hardship into leadership, how do we use the resilience we built, not for the sake of just resilience, but use that resilience to benefit not just for ourselves, but for our communities. And I think that is not something we often, practice together. So I would say that's really priority one. The second also is that, those of us who have experiences from elsewhere, I think those experiences are so needed and relevant in the US context of today. And I'm not sure how many organizations or communities recognize that. And so what can we learn from people who have experiences, global experiences around, polarization, divisions, conflict? Liz often talks about, what this, major shifts in majority minority, country. What does that mean, and where in the world did that happen, and how did it end? Like, how can we bring those experiences for the benefit of the United States and making sure that we continue to be great country, not again, but for the first time.
Great, thank you so much, Hamse. So we're going to have to wrap because we do have to go to another session, but I just wanted to say thank you again for writing the book. Thank you again for your presence here. And I think for me, just a challenge to everyone, because oftentimes, maybe this group does, but oftentimes people do not see the small ways in which they can be leaders in different situations, in their families, in their communities, in their schools. So I'm taking away from this conversation and this day really, like, what are the small things that I can do? It does not have to be huge. One of the small things is you can buy the book and then find little pathways, right, into your friends and your family, your colleagues, your teams, in order to make a difference. So thank you once again, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca and Hamza. And I will just say that I have been handed a copy of the book to aid you in finding it on the shelves.